So in this video, I kind of want to talk about the kind of archetype and the idea of the Razor support. I personally think that Razor has a lot of potential as a support, but obviously comes with some pretty, very obvious weaknesses, right? And overall, the biggest issue with a Razor is that he has no just inherent like disable. He can't lock anyone down, and that is something you have to consider when you're potentially wanting to play him. But as far as I'm concerned, beyond just the lack of lockdown, that's really the only weakness of the hero. Like, I think as a support in lane, whether played as a 4 or a 5, he's very, very strong. He could bully the core out of the lane, he could bully the support out of the jungle, he could really just take over the lane and like do whatever he wants, pretty uncontested. I'm gonna kind of talk about kind of the game plan of playing a Razor support in lane and how that kind of fits into the mold of like support laning philosophy as a whole. I am laning with a clockwork, and I think I've played the Razor support less than 10 times, but I think I've won 7 out of 10 games with it. And one of the big things that I noticed about the games I have won as the Razor 4/5 is my team has some good disable and initiation outside of myself. Now, with the Razor support, like I said, the biggest weakness is the lack of lockdown. And oftentimes when you have a hero, you make up for the weaknesses of the hero by buying items that kind of fills the gaps of the hero. So that would lead you to believe that like an Atos would be good on Razor, maybe a Yules. And I think the Atos is a really, really good choice for some lockdown, even though the Yules has its flaws kind of serving that role. But for the most part, not getting an Atos. And that's kind of the philosophy that I approach buying items for Razor. When I play Razor as a support, it's all about just surviving and existing. Because as long as you are surviving and existing with Razor at any point in the game, you are going to be one, winning the trade, and two, killing the enemy. And that's even the case for like, let's say you're up against a PA Phantom Assassin 1 on the other team. Let's say you buy a Ion Disc, Glimmer Cape, Ghost Scepter. I think those are all like the archetypal items I would buy on a Razor support. The Phantom Assassin initiates on you. Ion Disc pops. You begin the leash. As soon as the Ion Disc starts to fade away, you pop Ghost Scepter. As soon as the Ghost Scepter is like, 3 seconds out or 2 seconds out, whatever the fade time is on Glimmer Cape, you pop the Glimmer Cape. All of a sudden, you're immune for 8-10 seconds. The PA has no damage, and she's completely shut down in a fight. And that's kind of the approach I take with the Razor support. Is that you can't die. You're going to take a favorable trade about or against anyone on the enemy team. And you're just kind of a nuisance to deal with, especially with your storm being popped and just kind of existing in the middle of things the entire time. But moving beyond that and talking about this game specifically, I don't necessarily love the way I played here. There are things I would do different going back and rewatching this. However, there are some things I did like. So in general, as a support in the lane, you're responsible for the main portion of the lane equilibrium, and you're also trying to enable your core to get as much golden experience as possible, and to a lesser extent, the enemy core to get as little golden experience as possible. And let's talk about the ability you should pick up level 1 always. Always as the position 1 Razor is going to be the leash. Leash is imperative because it's really what's going to enable you to take any trade. It's also what's going to allow you to, one, bully the enemy support out of the jungle, or bully the enemy core out of the lane. And the importance or the kind of hierarchy of like which one you should do is dependent on a lot of different factors. In this replay, I'm investing a lot into taking control of the jungle, pushing the silencer out, getting pulls off. However, I think a lot of the time the pulls that I did were kind of unnecessary in the fact that oftentimes the lane equilibrium was already in our favor, and I pulled the jungle camp to deny creeps, but at the sacrifice of denying creeps, the enemy creep wave crashed into our tower, and it kind of reset the lane equilibrium back in the other team's favor. And as I'm growing and developing as a support, as I always am, I realize that it's way, way more important to keep the creep wave in front of your tower than it is just to deny enemy creeps. Because if the enemy creep wave is right in front of your tower, you can then basically wrap around the creep wave and just stand between the creep wave and the enemy core and just completely deny them farm. And if you completely deny the enemy core farm and experience, that's going to be way more value for the most part than any amount of experience you could deny by pulling the creeps. Now, granted, it's all about, kind of like the trade offs of the things you can be doing in lane. If you do play aggressively against the core, separate the core from the creep wave to deny them farm and experience, obviously that's going to give the enemy support the opportunities to buy a sentry, go to the jungle, deward the camp, and get a pull off. And, you know, there are some things about supporting where you just kind of develop instincts over time, right? You're going to be constantly flashing your eyes at the minimap, seeing where the enemy support is. And every time you get a glimmer of the enemy support's positioning in the minimap, you kind of develop an idea of like what they're doing, what their goals are. For me, if I see the enemy support out of my vision for a long time, I can only assume they're trying to get a pull off. And I know, especially know if that's important or not, something I really have to worry about is I can keep my eye on the minimap and see if my sentry is still there or not. In this lane specifically, I definitely wish I would have devoted more resources into just leashing the Void over and over and over again. Because when you leash the enemy core, they cannot stand there because you're going to drain their damage. You're going to be constantly attacking them as you're leashed to them. And they literally can't do that because they're going to be taking consistent damage and they're going to be just losing all their auto attack damage so they can't last hit. So for the most part, I think your first responsibility in general as the Razor support, and I guess is more applicable if you're playing the 4 in the off lane, is you want to focus on getting the lane on your tower's power pocket, and once it's in your team's power pocket, or at least on your side of the lane equilibrium, then you want to focus all your spells, all your resources on denying the enemy support. Or excuse me, denying the enemy core farm. And that's committing every leash cooldown on the core, pushing them away, giving separation from their core from your core, and just giving your core the entire wave completely uncontested. They could get all the last hit, all the denies, and that's really going to be the best bet. I think this has a lot of potential, the idea of the Razor support. If you itemize properly and you can just exist, just be alive and exist in a team fight, you're going to be taking winning trades and contributing a lot. However, you're going to provide literally no lockdowns for your team. So if you're considering drafting this in competitive, make sure you get good reliable lockdown to build around the Razor 4/5. Or if you're in a pub, it's going to be a big risk. A lot of times when I'm playing pubs and I'm picking support in the first pick phase, like I often do, if I'm really trying to be competitive, I'm going to pick a reliable stun every time just to make sure my team has a reliable stun. There's so many times where I picked the Razor 4 in ranked games and my team has no lockdown, no stun or anything, and those are just going to be inherently games that are very, very difficult to win. So it's going to be a kind of a risk, especially if you're like divine and up, I'd say, where individual play is going to be really, really important, right? And like, even if you play far above your MMR in the divine bracket, oftentimes games can still be hard Whereas, if you're playing far, far above your MMR in like, Guardian, Crusader bracket, you could really get away with a lot more. So this is kind of the demonstration of how things played out for me during this laning phase. Overall, I'm happy with how things went, and I just wanted to share this video with you, share my thoughts, and just really give a shout out to the potential that a Razor support has.